I remember the way the air shifted before she spoke, like the pause before a storm decides whether to break or pass. She stood by the open window, hair slightly undone, light catching the curve of her jaw. I shouldn't have been there that late. Neither of us had said it out loud, but the hour made everything quieter, smaller, harder to ignore. Elena, I said, her name barely a sound. She didn't look at me right away. Her fingers rested on the edge of the table, tapping once, twice, impatient or nervous, I couldn't tell. The clock on the wall ticked loud enough to make the silence between us feel deliberate. You can leave if you want, she said finally. Her voice was steady, but her hand didn't move. I should have turned, should have said goodnight, but she stepped closer when she said it. Not much, just one small step, but close enough for me to feel her warmth through the space between us. There was nothing theatrical about her, no performance, just a woman who'd spent years building walls that no longer seemed worth maintaining. Her perfume wasn't strong, something faint, like paper and rain. I'd smelled it before in her office when I was still her student, sitting too far across the desk, pretending I wasn't distracted by how carefully she chose her words. Now there was no desk, no rules, just that narrow distance between us and the hum of a streetlight outside her window. I laughed softly, mostly to fill the silence. You say that like you want me to. She tilted her head, a half-smile forming before she caught it, and pressed her lips together. Don't assume you know what I want, Noah. The way she said my name, slow, like she was testing how it tasted, hit harder than I expected. I wanted to say something smart, but my mouth went dry. So I nodded, stupidly, and she noticed. God, you're terrible at hiding things, she murmured. Her tone wasn't cruel. If anything, it was soft, almost affectionate, like she was used to seeing people try to hide what they shouldn't. She brushed past me, reaching for the book I'd left on the counter. The back of her hand brushed my sleeve, barely contact, but my pulse caught it like a wire humming with current. Is that why you came back? She asked, not looking up. I swallowed. I said I'd return it. She smiled again, faintly. Right. Always so responsible. The sarcasm was light, but it carried weight, something between amusement and warning. I watched her fingers trace the edge of the book cover. You reread it? I asked. Only the parts that still hurt, she said, almost under her breath. The words hung there. I didn't know whether to answer or just stand still and let them sink in. The lamp light pooled around her, turning her hair amber at the edges. She was older, yes, but not in the way that made you think of years. In a way that made you think of choices. She looked at me then, really looked, eyes calm, but searching as if she was deciding whether to undo something she'd promised herself not to. Her hand hovered near mine again, this time intentional. It's late, she said. I know. Then why are you still here? I didn't answer. I just stared at her hand. The space between us felt like the last second before a match catches fire. And then, a knock at the door. She froze. So did I. Neither of us moved. Her eyes flicked toward the door, then back to me, and for a moment I thought she might actually tell me to hide. But instead she whispered, low, almost trembling, "Don't go." She didn't open the door right away. Whoever had knocked must have given up, because after a few long seconds, the sound of retreating footsteps faded down the hall. When she finally turned back to me, she exhaled, slow and measured, like she'd been holding her breath too long. It's just the neighbor, she said. He forgets his mail sometimes. Her tone was casual, but her hands betrayed her, fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sweater, twisting the fabric until it wrinkled. I nodded, unsure if I was supposed to believe her. The air between us hadn't reset. It stayed charged, humming with the memory of what almost happened. Sorry, I said, my voice lower than I meant. Didn't mean to make things weird. You didn't, she said too quickly. Then quieter, not more than they already were. She went to refill her glass of water. I noticed the faint tremor in her wrist as she poured, how carefully she set the glass down so it wouldn't clink. I wanted to ask her something simple, something normal. But normal didn't exist for us anymore. She glanced up, catching me staring. You always look at people that way. What way? Like you try to memorize them. I smiled a little, embarrassed. Maybe just the interesting ones. That earned a soft, reluctant laugh from her, small but genuine. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "When I was your age," she said, "I thought I'd have everything figured out by now. Turns out I was mostly good at pretending." There was a tired honesty in her voice that didn't need pity, just understanding. "Maybe pretending's part of surviving," I said. She looked at me like she wanted to argue, then didn't. "Maybe." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was weighted, like we both knew something important had just passed between us, but couldn't name it. Her eyes softened. "How long since you've been in love, Noah?" I hesitated. "Depends on what counts." That's not an answer. Neither is the question. She smiled again, but her gaze drifted away, lost in thought. "It's been years for me," she said. "After the divorce, I just shut most of that part of me down. It was easier. I didn't know what to say to that." She wasn't fishing for comfort, just telling the truth to someone who happened to be close enough to hear it. Her sleeve brushed against my arm when she reached for her glass. A second too long? Maybe, but I didn't move. She noticed. She didn't move either. Her eyes met mine again, steady this time. "You shouldn't look at me like that," she whispered. "How should I look at you?" She didn't answer. Her breath brushed against my jaw as she passed, close enough that her hair grazed my shoulder. For a moment, neither of us said a word. And then, in that quiet, she let her hand rest, just barely, on the back of mine. It wasn't a confession. Not yet. Just a truth neither of us was ready to say aloud. The next time I saw her, it wasn't planned. It was a Wednesday afternoon, gray and slow, and I was at the cafe near campus, hunched over my laptop, pretending to write. I didn't notice her until she was already standing in line. Elena. Same old coat, hair tied up loosely, reading glasses perched low on her nose. She looked tired, but in that way that made her seem more real, like she'd stopped trying to impress anyone. She caught me looking and hesitated, just long enough for something unspoken to pass between us. Then she smiled, small and guarded. I motioned toward the empty chair across from me. She hesitated again, then walked over, setting her bag down beside mine. "This feels dangerous," she said, half joking. "It's just coffee," I replied. She arched an eyebrow. "That's what people always say before they ruin something." Her words hit harder than she intended. I wanted to ask what she meant, but her phone buzzed before I could. She glanced at the screen, her expression tightened, and she flipped it face down on the table. "Everything okay?" I asked. "It's just my ex," she said quietly. "He still thinks we're supposed to check in once a week. Old habits." Her voice went soft at the edges, the way people sound when they're halfway between anger and exhaustion. I reached for her hand before I could think. She didn't pull away, not at first. Her fingers tensed slightly beneath mine, a flicker of uncertainty, then stilled. "You shouldn't do that," she murmured. "Do what?" "Make things harder." Her eyes lifted, and for a moment, everything around us, the sound of espresso machines, the chatter, the clinking cups, faded into a muted hum. The tension was quiet, but absolute. She was close enough that I could see the faint scar along her collarbone, the kind that tells a story you don't ask about. Her lips parted as if to say something, but a shadow fell across the table. "Professor Vance?" We both froze. A young woman, maybe 20, a student, stood there holding a coffee cup, looking between us. "Oh," the student said quickly. "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to say hi." Elena smiled too quickly, the kind of smile that hides panic. Sada. How are you?" They exchanged a few polite words, but I could see the tightness in Elena's jaw, the way she didn't look at me once. When the student finally left, she exhaled sharply. "See," she said. "Dangerous." She reached for her coat, ready to leave. I caught her wrist, gently, just enough to stop her. "Elena," I said, "we didn't do anything wrong." She looked down at where my hand held hers, then up at me. "That's what makes it worse." Her pulse fluttered beneath my fingers. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then she stepped closer, her voice almost a whisper. "You don't know what this could cost me. Then tell me to stop." She didn't. Her breath touched my cheek, the faint scent of coffee and something floral. We were one movement away from something irreversible. And then her phone buzzed again, slicing through the quiet. She flinched, pulled her hand free, and turned away. But as she left, she paused at the door, glancing back once. Eyes unreadable, mouth barely moving. "Noah," she said, "don't make me want this." Rain pressed against the windows like static. The kind of storm that turns the world gray and private. I hadn't planned to go to her apartment again. I told myself I wouldn't. But she texted just one line. "Can you bring the book you borrowed?" The blue one. There wasn't a blue one. I knew it. She knew it. When she opened the door, she didn't look surprised. Just tired. Or maybe trying not to seem relieved. "You came," she said, stepping aside. "You asked." That's not the same thing. Her hair was damp from the rain, curls darkened, falling against her face. She pushed them back with one hand, her sleeve brushing her cheek. The movement was simple, but I couldn't look away. The air inside was warm, heavy with the scent of tea and something faintly citrus. She'd left a candle burning, its light flickering against the wall. I set my jacket on the chair, and she hovered near the counter, pretending to tidy papers that didn't need tidying. We both knew what was happening, but neither of us had language that didn't sound like an excuse. Finally, she said, "People talk, Noah. They always do." "Let them," I said. Her laugh was short, sharp. "You don't understand what that means for me." I took a step closer. "Then explain it." She turned to face me, eyes bright but tense. "You're 26. You can afford mistakes. I can't." Her voice cracked slightly at the end. It was the first time I'd heard that from her. Not control, just honesty. I reached out without thinking, brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. My fingers lingered longer than they should have. Her breath hitched. "Don't," she whispered, but she didn't step away. I could feel the warmth of her skin, the tremor just beneath it. My hand slid to her jaw, thumb grazing the edge of her lip before I caught myself. "You keep saying don't," I said quietly, "but you never move." She closed her eyes, just for a second. "Because moving would make it real." The clock ticked somewhere behind us, too loud, too slow. "I think it already is," I said. Her eyes opened, sharp, glassy, caught between fear and wanting. She leaned back against the counter, and for a heartbeat, everything about her, the way her chest rose, the way her fingers gripped the edge behind her, spoke louder than anything either of us could say. "You shouldn't be here," she said again. "Then tell me to go." Her lips parted, but no sound came. I stepped closer until there was no real space left, just breath and the faint tremble of restraint. She looked up at me, eyes wide, voice barely a whisper. "This will ruin us," she said. "Maybe," I answered, "but not tonight." Her hand lifted, slow, trembling, fingers brushing the side of my neck, tracing the line of my jaw. The storm outside cracked, light flashing through the room. For a single moment, we were suspended there, on the edge of something neither of us could take back. Then, a knock at the door. Louder this time. She froze. So did I, her hands still against my skin, her lips an inch away. She whispered, almost soundless, "Don't move." The knock didn't stop. 3 slow, deliberate raps, the kind that sounded like they belonged to someone who already knew what they'd find. Elena's breath caught. She stepped back, eyes darting toward the door, then to me. "Stay there," she whispered. Her voice had lost its composure. I froze by the counter as she opened the door just wide enough to reveal a man's voice, low and familiar. "Your light's on," he said. "Thought maybe you were still up." Her ex-husband. I'd seen him once, years ago, at a department event. He'd been all confidence and smooth charm then. The kind of man who looked like he'd never been left. "Just grading papers," Elena said, forcing a small laugh. "What are you doing here, Mark?" "I was in the neighborhood. Thought we could talk." We never finished that conversation about the house. From where I stood, I could see her hand gripping the edge of the door, knuckles pale, jaw tight. "This isn't a good time," she said. Something in his tone shifted. "You're not alone, are you?" She didn't answer fast enough. My pulse pounded. Mark leaned slightly, trying to see past her. His voice dropped. "You always did need someone to keep you company when you got lonely." "Mark, please." She pushed the door closed before he could say more. The latch clicked, but the echo of his words hung heavy in the room. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she turned to me. "You shouldn't have been here tonight." "Elena," no, her voice shook now. He'll tell people. You don't understand how this works. They'll think it started before you graduated, She stopped herself, pressing a hand to her temple. I've worked my whole life to not be someone's rumor. I stepped closer, trying to reach her, but she flinched when I touched her arm, not pulling away completely, just trembling beneath my hand. I didn't mean to make things worse, I said. You didn't, she whispered. Then, softer, you just made me remember what it feels like to want something that can ruin me. The room felt too small, air too thin. I could see the tears she was fighting, not the kind that fall, but the kind that stayed behind the eyes, burning. She took a slow breath, steadied herself, and met my gaze. You need to go before I stop asking. I should have left. I knew that, but I didn't move. Elena, I said quietly, was it ever really just the book? Or was that just an excuse? Her lips parted, the truth breaking through hesitation. I didn't want the book, she said. I wanted to see if you'd still come. Something inside me tightened, relief and ache in the same breath. I took a step closer, voice barely above a whisper. And now that I did, her reply came after a long silence. Now, she said, we don't get to pretend anymore. She brushed past me, close enough that her shoulder grazed mine, deliberate, trembling, and walked toward the window. The storm had eased, but the air still carried the smell of rain. Her reflection stared back at me in the glass, faint, uncertain. Then she turned slightly, not looking directly at me, and said, come back tomorrow, if you still want this. I went back. I told myself I wouldn't, that the space of a night would cool everything down. But the thought of her sitting in that quiet apartment alone wouldn't leave me. When she opened the door, she didn't look surprised, just wary, like she'd already rehearsed every version of what might happen next. You came, she said softly. You told me to. I told you to think. I did, I said. And I still came. She exhaled, shoulders loosening as if she'd been holding that breath all day. Then she stepped aside. The place was dim, only the light from a single lamp by the couch. A record played low in the background, an old jazz song, scratchy but tender. She stood across from me, arms folded, fingers tracing her sleeve like she didn't trust her own hands. If anyone finds out, she began. I know. It could ruin me. I know that too. Then why? Because pretending I don't care feels worse. The words hit her like something she tried not to imagine hearing. Her mouth parted, but she didn't answer. We stood there, caught between two truths, what we wanted and what wanting would cost. Finally, she said, you think this is simple, don't you? No, I said. I think it's honest. Her jaw tightened. Honesty isn't always kind. Neither is hiding. That did it. The distance between us broke. She crossed the room, slowly, steps deliberate, until she stood close enough that I could feel her breath on my throat. Her eyes searched mine, trying to find something, doubt, maybe, or hesitation, but there wasn't any left. You'll regret this, she whispered. Maybe, I said, but not right now. Her hand lifted, trembling slightly, resting against my chest. I could feel her pulse through her fingertips. My own heartbeat matched it, uneven, too fast. She leaned in just enough for her forehead to touch mine. The warmth of her skin, the faint scent of her perfume, it all blurred into something that felt inevitable. I can't promise you anything, she said. I'm not asking for promises. Silence stretched between us, fragile but alive. Then she closed her eyes and exhaled, her voice barely a sound. You make it so hard to be careful. I touched her cheek, brushing back a strand of hair that had fallen forward. She turned slightly into my hand, eyes opening again, clear, certain now. There wasn't a question left. Her hand slid to the back of my neck, pulling me just a little closer. The distance between us disappeared, but the world didn't stop. It only got quieter, more deliberate. No words, no denial, just the sound of rain starting again outside, soft and steady against the window. When we finally pulled apart, she didn't look away. This doesn't make it easier, she said. I know, but it makes it real. She nodded once, slow. Then maybe that's enough. Morning light found its way through her curtains, soft and quiet, like it didn't want to wake anything that had finally settled. I sat on the edge of the couch, shoes by the door, unsure what counted as staying and what counted as leaving. The night had shifted something between us, not in a dramatic way, just enough to make silence feel safe. Elena moved through the kitchen barefoot, tying her robe as she went. The faint sound of a kettle warming filled the room. She didn't speak at first, just glanced toward me with that same half-smile she used when she wanted to say more but wasn't ready to. "You're still here," she said finally. "I wasn't sure if I should be." "You shouldn't," she said, then added quieter, "but I'm glad you are." The kettle clicked off. She poured 2 cups, placed one in front of me, and sat on the arm of the chair across from the couch. Her knee brushed mine as she leaned forward to hand me the cup. The contact was casual, almost accidental, but it didn't feel like one. We drank in silence for a while, the kind of silence that holds warmth instead of distance. "I kept thinking last night would make everything harder," she said at last. "But it didn't." I looked at her, waiting. She smiled faintly. "It made it simpler, clearer." "Ow! I stopped pretending I didn't want this," she said, then laughed quietly, shaking her head. "And that's terrifying." I set the cup down. "You don't have to be terrified." "I do," she said. "But I also don't have to be alone in it." That landed heavier than she meant. She reached out, hesitated, then let her hand rest on mine. Her fingers were cool, her touch steady. "I spent so long being careful," she murmured, "doing what was expected, what looked right. And then you came along and made me remember that wanting something doesn't always mean ruining it." I squeezed her hand lightly. "Then maybe we just stop apologizing for wanting." She looked up, eyes soft, a little wet at the corners. "You really think it's that simple?" "No," I said, "but it's a start." She leaned back, exhaling through a smile. For a moment, she seemed younger, not in years, but in weight, like she'd put something down. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky had that pale, washed-out color that comes after storms, when everything feels a little cleaner. I reached out, brushing her hair back behind her ear. She didn't move away. Instead, she shifted closer, resting her forehead against mine. We stayed like that for a while. No need for grand gestures or promises. Just warmth. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "So what now?" "Breakfast," I said, and then we figured the rest out. Her laugh was small and real. "That sounds dangerously reasonable. Guess we'll take our chances." She nodded once, then intertwined her fingers with mine. The world outside went on as usual, but in that small room, it felt like we'd found something worth keeping. Not perfect, not easy, but honest. And maybe that was enough. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?